He laughed right in her face. A Navy SEAL admiral, standing in front of the most lethal operators on Earth, looked at the only woman in formation and sneered. "Come on, sweetheart. Tell us your cute little call sign." The room reacted instantly. Smirks. Leaning forward. Eyes locked on her like a hunt had begun. They wanted her to crack. To stutter. To prove she never belonged there. She didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. She met his eyes. And spoke two ice-cold words. Every smirk vanished. The Admiral's face drained of color. Jaws slammed shut. Boots froze mid-shift. Men who had stared down death suddenly looked like they'd seen a ghost. Because Red Widow wasn't a cute call sign. It was the classified name of a black operation so violent, so devastating. It saved American lives and buried the careers of anyone who touched it. A name so toxic, even flag officers weren't supposed to know it existed. And the Admiral, who had just mocked her, suddenly couldn't speak. Before I tell you what happened next, tell us where you're watching from. And subscribe. Because what followed didn't just end his authority. It exposed a truth that had been buried for years. The silence didn't break. It spread. The Admiral stood there, frozen in front of the formation, his mouth opening once, then closing again. He hadn't lost control of the room. He'd lost something worse. Command. Behind him, the wind rolled across the training grounds, lifting dust along the concrete like it was afraid to move too loudly. 40 operators stood locked in place, but their eyes were no longer on the Admiral. They were on her. Lieutenant Commander Arwen Blackwood didn't shift her weight, didn't lower her gaze. Her hands remained flat against the seams of her trousers, fingers relaxed, pulse steady. If anyone had expected satisfaction on her face, they would have been disappointed. There was nothing there, just calm. The Admiral finally found his voice, but it came out thinner than before. "That's not funny," he said, forcing a short laugh that fooled no one. "Someone's been feeding you stories." No one laughed with him. A few operators exchanged glances, quick, sharp looks that carried something new. Recognition. Or maybe fear. Because Red Widow wasn't a nickname you joked about. It wasn't something whispered in bars or slapped onto morale patches. It was the kind of designation that showed up once in a career, if you were unlucky, and then disappeared from conversation forever. Arwen didn't respond. She didn't need to. The Admiral's eyes searched the line now, not for imperfections, but for confirmation. For someone, anyone, to look confused, to look amused, to look ignorant. He didn't find it. One operator, a senior chief with scars down his forearm, swallowed hard. Another tightened his jaw, so hard the muscle jumped. These weren't rookies. These were men who'd buried teammates and never spoken their names out loud again. The Admiral took a step back. It wasn't dramatic, just a half step. But on a parade ground where authority was measured in inches, it was enough. "Formation dismissed," he snapped, too quickly. "Training resumes in 20. The words landed wrong. Out of order. Unearned. No one moved. That was when Commander Zephyr Colleran, training officer, career professional, neutral to a fault, stepped forward. Just one pace. Not a challenge. A correction. "Sir," Colleran said evenly. "Protocol requires completion of inspection before dismissal." The Admiral turned on him. For a fraction of a second, the old power flared. Then it died just as fast. "Dismissed," he repeated, softer this time. Boots finally moved. The formation broke with mechanical precision, but the energy had shifted. Conversations didn't spark. Jokes didn't fly. The operators dispersed in silence, glancing at Arwen as they passed. Not with hostility now, but with something closer to calculation. She walked alone toward the equipment building, her pace unhurried. Inside, the air smelled of oil, salt, and metal. Lockers slammed. Gear clinked. Normally, this was where bravado returned. Today, it didn't. Lieutenant Orion Thade, team leader, golden boy, the Admiral's favorite, watched her from across the room. He'd smirked earlier. He wasn't smirking now. "You hear that?" One operator muttered quietly. "Hear what?" "Exactly." Arwen checked her vest methodically. "Wait. Straps. Balance." When she lifted it, she felt the difference immediately. 2 extra pounds, added unevenly, just enough to throw off a long swim. She didn't react. She removed the weights, redistributed them, and reset the vest as if it had always been that way. That was the thing about Red Widow. She didn't announce problems. She solved them. A presence shifted beside her, Captain Vesper Reeve. Naval Intelligence. No rank flash. No unnecessary words. Lieutenant Commander, Reeve said. Captain. Their eyes met for a fraction longer than professional courtesy required. He recognized the name, Reeve said quietly. Yes. That wasn't supposed to happen today. Arwen secured the final strap. Plans change. Reeve studied her. The Admiral is already making calls. He would. And if he pulls you from the program? He won't. Why? Arwen finally looked at her. Because people who mock legends don't like being proven wrong in private. Reeve exhaled slowly. Extraction briefing in 5. Outside, rotors began to spin. The ocean was waiting. And this time, everyone was watching her, not to see if she failed, but to see just how far the truth was about to go. The Pacific didn't care about reputations. 15 miles offshore, the water rolled in heavy, uneven swells under a sky the color of dull steel. The transport helicopters hovered low, rotors hammering the air as operators lined up at the open doors. Admiral Kane watched from the command vessel, arms crossed tight across his chest. He hadn't said another word since the parade ground. He didn't need to. The exercise itself was his answer. Extended maritime insertion. Full combat load. Competitive retrieval. Designed to expose weakness. One by one, teams dropped into the water, disappearing beneath the surface with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Thade's team went first. Strong swimmers. Aggressive pace. Textbook. Arwen's team entered 30 seconds later. She took point, not because she'd been assigned it, but because no one challenged it. Underwater, the world narrowed to pressure, rhythm, and breath. Green light filtered through the depths as the teams moved toward the target. A decommissioned oil platform rising like a rusted skeleton from the sea. Arwen didn't signal the way SEAL manuals taught. Her hand movements were smaller, tighter, almost lazy to an untrained eye. But her team stayed glued to her, adjusting instinctively without realizing why. Lieutenant Estra's Kelwin noticed. He was new, 8 months out of BUD/S. Still sharp enough to know when something felt off. The cadence was wrong. Faster. Cleaner. They reached the submerged entrance. Standard protocol called for surface recon. Team stack. Controlled breach. Arwen stopped. She raised one finger, then made a gesture none of them recognized, and vanished into the structure. For half a second, her team hesitated. Then they followed. Inside, the platform groaned as water surged through steel corridors. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Training sensors pulsed faint red along the walls, designed to trigger if approached along known SEAL vectors. Arwen moved through them like smoke. She didn't avoid the sensors. She threaded between them, paths so narrow they looked accidental. They weren't. When they reached the objective chamber, Thade's team was already there. He had both hands on the package. Even through his rebreather, Kelwin could see the grin. Then everything went wrong. The water shifted. Not violently. Deliberately. A pressure change rolled through the chamber, clouding visibility just enough to break focus. Thade reacted on instinct, turning toward what felt like movement. There was nothing there. By the time he realized it, the package was gone. Arwen's team was already moving. No shoving. No strikes. No chaos. Just absence. Back aboard the command vessel, monitors flickered as teams surfaced. Times appeared on screen. Thade's jaw tightened. He hadn't lost. He'd been outplayed. Admiral Kane leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Time differential minimal, he said flatly. Unorthodox methods. Sloppy execution. The package was secured, Commander Karin replied. Objective achieved. Barely, Kane snapped. His gaze flicked toward Arwen as she removed her gear, water streaming from her sleeves. Real operations don't reward improvisation. Arwen met his eyes. Real operations reward survival, sir. The Admiral looked away first. That night, in the briefing room, tension clung to the air like humidity. Call sign ceremony in 3 days, Karin announced. Attendance mandatory. Thade glanced sideways at Arwen. Some names are earned, he said quietly. Not claimed. She didn't answer. Later, in a narrow corridor lit by flickering fluorescence, Captain Reeve caught up to her. He's digging, Reeve said. Harder than expected. He would. Records. Old deployments. Ghost files. Arwen stopped walking. Then he's close. Reeve searched her face. You ready for what happens when this breaks? Arwen thought of the name again. Red Widow. Not the legend. The promise. I've been ready for 7 years. Somewhere behind them, unseen, Lieutenant Kelwin stood frozen in the shadows, having heard just enough to realize that whatever Red Widow really was, it hadn't come to be judged. It had come to finish something. By morning, the training center felt different. Not louder, not tenser, sharper. Whispers followed Arwen down corridors that had ignored her for weeks. Conversations stopped just a beat too late. Doors didn't slam anymore. They closed carefully. Admiral Kane hadn't slept. He stood in the observation room overlooking the next evolution, dark circles etched beneath his eyes as data scrolled across the monitors. Personnel files, deployment summaries, redacted blocks stacked on redacted blocks. Too many. Arwen Blackwood's record looked clean on the surface. Too clean. Naval Academy, intelligence rotation, surface warfare, selection pipeline. But underneath? Gaps. Entire years that resolved into nothing but clearance stamps and sealed references. No missions. No citations. No failures. That wasn't normal. That was deliberate. The evolution alarm sounded. Urban combat facility. Multi-story structure. Live simulation. Smoke, alarms, shifting layouts. Designed to overwhelm. Kane leaned toward the technician. Watch her. Inside the structure, teams moved fast. Doors breached. Corners cleared. Commands barked. Then the system glitched. At first, no one realized it. Smoke thickened too quickly. Alarms escalated without command input. Doors locked instead of cycling. This isn't scripted, the technician said. Kane's jaw tightened. Shut it down. Negative, sir. Control nodes inside the structure. On the monitors, chaos bloomed. Teams aborted and redirected, muscle memory taking over. All except one. Arwen's team moved deeper. What the hell is she doing? Kane snapped. She's going for the node, Colrin said slowly. That violates protocol. She's right. A ceiling collapsed in one corridor, blocking her team's path. Arwen didn't hesitate. She signaled them away, toward an emergency exit, and kept going alone. Kane's fists clenched. She's breaking every rule we have. She's preventing something worse, Colrin replied. Smoke swallowed the camera feed as Arwen disappeared down a service passage that wasn't on the standard layout. Then another feed lit up. A sealed door. Security grade. Not training hardware. How did that get there? Kane demanded. No one answered. On screen, Arwen knelt, fingers moving fast across a concealed panel. No hesitation. No trial and error. The door opened. Behind it, Fade's team was trapped. Visibility near zero. Alarms screaming. Oxygen alarms starting to chirp. Arwen waved them through without a word. How does she know that bypass? Kane whispered. No one dared answer. Minutes later, she reached the control node. Her silhouette moved through smoke and strobing red lights, hands steady as she executed commands that weren't in any manual Colrin had ever seen. Systems rolled back. Smoke thinned. Doors unlocked. The building exhaled. By the time medics cleared the last operator, the realization had settled over the command room like a weight. That hadn't been luck. That had been experience. In Kane's office, the walls felt closer than usual. You will explain yourself, he said as Arwen stood at attention. Those systems are proprietary. Even I don't have access. Some training isn't logged at this level, sir. I have the highest clearance in this command. Yes, sir, she said evenly. Something in her tone made him step back. Who do you really work for? He demanded. CIA? Yeah? Some off-book unit. I work for the mission. Kane stared at her, searching for arrogance. Defiance. Finding none. You're confined to quarters, he said finally. Effective immediately. A knock interrupted him. Captain Reeve entered without waiting. Admiral. General Oversight has requested Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's presence. Kane hesitated. Too many eyes now. Too much attention. Fine, he said. But this isn't over. As they walked away, Reeve didn't speak until the door sealed behind them. That wasn't a malfunction, she said quietly. It was sabotage. Arwen didn't react. By whom? The access codes traced back to his terminal. Arwen closed her eyes for just a moment. 7 years, she said. And he still doesn't realize. Realize what? That Red Widow doesn't hunt prey, Arwen replied. She waits. That night, a message flashed across a secure screen in Reeve's quarters. Widow protocol active. Package inbound. The ceremony was in 48 hours. And Admiral Kane was about to learn the difference between authority and truth. The next 48 hours tightened around the base like a closing fist. Senior visitors arrived in quiet convoys. Flags were raised. Schedules were adjusted. The culmination ceremony, normally procedural, almost forgettable, was suddenly elevated to something else entirely. Public. Observed. Recorded. Admiral Kane watched it all from behind glass, his confidence eroding by degrees he refused to acknowledge. Every attempt to access deeper files hit the same wall. Clearance denied. Reference unavailable. Authority insufficient. That had never happened to him before. Not once in 30 years. Arwen remained confined to quarters, exactly where Kane wanted her. Visible, isolated, controllable. Or so he believed. Captain Reeve visited her that night, activating a localized jammer the moment the door sealed. He's panicking, Reeve said. That makes him reckless. It also makes him predictable. Reeve studied her. Once this breaks, there's no quiet ending. There was never meant to be one. The package is ready, Reeve continued. Chain of custody verified. Independent oversight confirmed. Arwen nodded. Then it ends where it began. The morning of the ceremony arrived clear and bright. Too bright. Dress uniforms filled the hall. Medals caught the light. Conversations hummed with polished professionalism. Cameras were positioned carefully, not to record history, but to preserve appearances. Admiral Kane stood center stage. He looked flawless. Inside, something was fraying. One by one, operators were called forward. Chalices raised. Call signs announced. Applause measured and respectful. When Lieutenant Thade stepped forward, Kane allowed himself a moment of relief. Beacon, he announced. For leadership under pressure. Thade accepted the chalice, but his eyes flicked. Not to Kane, but to Arwen, seated alone in the front row. She hadn't looked away. Soon, only one chair remained occupied. Kane inhaled slowly. Lieutenant Commander Arwen Blackwood. She stood. The room quieted in a way Kane hadn't anticipated. Not polite silence. Attentive silence. He held the chalice out longer than necessary. A pause. A stage. Before we proceed, he said, voice smooth. Perhaps you'd like to share an operational achievement worthy of a call sign. A subtle ripple moved through the audience. This wasn't protocol. Arwen met his eyes. My operational history is classified. Kane smiled thinly. Of course. He turned slightly toward the guests. Call signs are earned. Through verifiable action. Then back to her. What call sign have you been assigned? For the first time since the parade ground, Arwen moved differently. She accepted the chalice. Didn't drink. Didn't rush. She looked at him. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with something far worse. Certainty. Red Widow, sir. The name didn't echo. It detonated. Color drained from Kane's face so fast it looked unreal. The chalice slipped from his hand, shattering against the stage. Salt water spread across the polished floor. That's impossible, he whispered. The audience leaned forward as one. Red Widow is classified. It was, Arwen said calmly. Until today. She turned to the room. 7 years ago, 6 operators were captured during a compromised intelligence mission in denied territory. Official recovery was abandoned. Kane's hand gripped the podium. I was deployed as the recovery asset, she continued. Unofficial. Unacknowledged. Successful. A chair scraped loudly. Lieutenant Thade stood, voice unsteady. You carried me out. 3 miles. I never saw your face. Others rose with him. One by one, operators stood. Saluted. Not Kane. Her. Kane staggered back into his chair as Captain Reeve stepped forward, removing her insignia to reveal stars. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood's placement here was intentional, Reeve said. This program was the final phase of a counterintelligence operation. She turned toward Kane. Your access codes were used to compromise that mission. I was in a briefing. Kane protested weakly. You left for 23 minutes, Reeve replied. Logs confirmed. Silence pressed in. Arwen stepped forward. I promised those men I'd find the breach, she said. No matter how long it took. She unpinned the Red Widow insignia and fixed it to her collar. That promise ends today. The room stood frozen. And Kane finally understood. This hadn't been a challenge. It had been a reckoning. No one rushed to stop it. No one spoke. The room, packed with rank, medals, and decades of authority, stood suspended between 2 truths. The one they'd lived with, and the one unfolding in front of them. Admiral Kane tried to stand. His legs didn't cooperate. Two security officers shifted instinctively, then froze. They hadn't been ordered, and for the first time in their careers, they weren't sure who had the right to give the order anymore. Captain Reeve didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The investigation identified a pattern, she said, walking slowly across the stage. Repeated attempts to undermine, isolate, and discredit the operative who executed the recovery mission. Behavior consistent with someone afraid that the truth might surface. Kane looked up at Arwen, eyes glassy. You used this place as bait. No, Arwen replied evenly. I used it as a mirror. She turned back to the audience. What happened 7 years ago wasn't treason in the dramatic sense. It was worse. Carelessness at the highest level. A moment of negligence that almost got 6 men executed on foreign soil. She paused, and then silence. A murmur moved through the room. Not outrage. Recognition. Those men survived, Arwen continued, because someone outside the system was willing to move without permission. She didn't say I. She never did. Kane found his voice again, thin and frayed. Even if that were true, this isn't how accountability works. Reeve stopped beside him. This is exactly how it works when the system protects itself. She gestured subtly. Screens at the side of the hall flickered to life. Logs. Access records. Timestamps. A highlighted block pulsed quietly. 23 minutes. Kane stared at it like it might blink first. You were never meant to be punished publicly, Reeve said. You were meant to tell the truth privately. Arwen met Kane's eyes one last time. You never did. That was when something unexpected happened. Lieutenant Kelwin, youngest in the room, least decorated, stepped forward from the back row. Permission to speak, he said, voice tight. Every head turned. Reeve nodded once. Kelwin swallowed. I reviewed the Song 1 incident last night. What little wasn't sealed. He looked at Arwen. The recovery window you had, it shouldn't have been survivable. It wasn't, Arwen said quietly. Kelwin turned back to the room. We keep talking about standards, about who belongs. But if this is the cost of excellence, he gestured toward Arwen, then maybe we've been measuring the wrong things. Silence followed. Not awkward. Decisive. Reeve closed her folder. Effective immediately, Admiral Kane is relieved of command pending formal inquiry. Kane didn't protest. He couldn't. Security finally moved, not roughly, not ceremoniously, just efficiently, the way professionals handle something that's already over. As he was escorted down the aisle, no one met his eyes. Not one. When the doors closed behind him, the room exhaled. Reeve turned back to Arwen. Lieutenant Commander Arwen Blackwood. Call sign Red Widow. She opened a small case. Inside was an insignia few people in the room had ever seen in person. By authority of Naval Special Warfare Command, Reeve said, you are hereby reassigned, effective immediately. Arwen accepted it without ceremony. No smile. No nod. Just acknowledgement. Applause began somewhere in the back. Then spread. Not loud. Not explosive. Sincere. Later, outside under the fading light, Thade approached her. Slower this time. Careful. I was wrong, he said. About a lot of things. Arwen regarded him. Most people are, she replied. At first. He hesitated. Why stay quiet all this time? She looked past him, toward the horizon where the sun met the sea. Because some truths don't need noise, she said. They need timing. Behind them, the base returned to motion. But nothing there would ever feel the same again. And Red Widow? She wasn't done yet. The official story moved fast. By nightfall, statements were drafted. By morning, headlines would never mention names. Only health-related retirement, administrative review, temporary reassignment. The system did what it always did. It protected itself. But inside the base, the truth traveled faster than any press release ever could. In the quiet moments between duties, operators stopped Arwen in hallways they'd once ignored her in. No salutes. No speeches. Just nods. Eye contact held a fraction longer than necessary. Respect. Earned, not demanded. Lieutenant Kelwin found her near the flight line as the sun dipped low, turning the ocean copper. They're saying the program will change, he said. Selection criteria. Training paths. How teams are built. Good, Arwen replied. That wasn't rhetorical, he added. They're asking for your input. She looked at him then. Really looked. The questions behind his eyes weren't about tactics. They were about belief. Change doesn't come from rewriting manuals, she said. It comes from who's allowed to stand in the room when decisions are made. He nodded slowly. Are you staying? Arwen didn't answer right away. That night, Captain Reeve joined her in the equipment room. No jammers this time. No secrecy. It's over, Reeve said. Your cover, I mean. You can walk away. No more shadows. And the program? Reeve smiled faintly. It's not optional anymore. Arwen ran her fingers along the edge of a steel locker, worn smooth by decades of hands just like hers. They'll push back. They already are. And when the next Red Widow shows up? Reeve met her gaze. She won't be alone. The next morning, a new class assembled on the same parade ground where it had all started. 20 operators. 2 women. No special announcements. No lowered voices. Just the wind, the flags, and the sound of boots aligning on concrete. Commander Colleran cleared his throat. Today, your instructor will address you. Arwen stepped forward. Same posture. Same calm. Different weight behind it now. This program won't care where you came from, she said. It won't care who doubts you. It will care what you do when it gets hard. Her eyes moved across the formation. And it will get hard. Somewhere in the line, someone swallowed. She paused, letting the silence work. Red Widow isn't a legend, she continued. It's a reminder that the most dangerous thing in any system is the truth showing up uninvited. No one moved. No one looked away. As the formation broke and the day began, Reeve watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. 7 years earlier, a name had been buried. Today, it had become something else entirely. Not a weapon, a standard. And standards, once raised, have a way of refusing to go back down. Weeks later, the base moved the way it always had. Training schedules, rotations, deployments. On the surface, nothing looked different. But underneath, everything was. Files once stamped untouchable were quietly reopened. Evaluation boards changed who was allowed to speak and who was finally required to listen. Operators who had spent careers proving strength in one narrow way began learning that survival, adaptability, and judgment mattered just as much as brute force ever had. Red Widow became a reference point. Not a story told loudly. Not a legend exaggerated over drinks. A name used carefully. The kind you mentioned only when something had gone very wrong, or when something absolutely had to be done. Arwen never corrected anyone who whispered it. She didn't wear it like a badge of dominance. She wore it like a reminder. One evening, as the sun dropped low over the Pacific, Lieutenant Kelwin stood watching the water churn against the rocks. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Letting it come out like that. Arwen considered the question. I regret the cost, she said. Not the truth. And the Admiral? He made his choices long before he met me. Kelwin nodded. People are still trying to figure out how they missed you. She allowed herself the faintest smile. They weren't looking. A transport aircraft roared overhead, lifting into the darkening sky, carrying another team toward another mission no one would ever hear about. Arwen watched until it disappeared. Somewhere out there, someone would make a decision that mattered. Someone would need help that couldn't wait for permission. And if they ever heard the name Red Widow, it wouldn't be followed by laughter. It would be followed by relief. Because they'd know exactly what it meant. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stands quietly in formation, waits to be mocked, and then reminds the world who survives when arrogance fails. If you believe stories like this matter, stories about quiet professionals, earned respect, and truths that refuse to stay buried, subscribe to Mindfront. Because the next story won't just challenge what you think you know. It might change how you recognize real strength when you see it.